Hello, and welcome back to the COVID Wellness Support Program. Today we're going to be talking about relationships. Specifically, we're going to talk about how symptoms of operational stress injuries can interfere with relationships and impact relationships. We're going to talk about what's important within a healthy relationship, things we should be striving for, and we're going to learn various strategies to help improve the quality of the relationships that you are already in. So in terms of operational stress injuries and relationships, the symptoms of an operational stress injury can contribute to things like relationship conflict, relationship avoidance, and social isolation. Now, we've already talked about a bunch of the symptoms of OSIs, or operational stress injuries, and so I'm sure by now many of you can probably piece together how this may be the case, but let's dive into this in more detail. So first of all, one of the big symptoms that we get with OSIs is those intrusive thoughts and memories, right? We have these automatic thoughts that are popping up. They're negative. Sometimes we get memories that come along with them. It can be really challenging to remain in the present moment when we're constantly being flooded by these thoughts. So first and foremost, this can really distract from a conversation. It's hard to pay attention to just about anything when you're being reminded of something, especially if it's very negative in context. Memories can bring up distress and can make it hard just to be present with your partner, whether it's in a conversation or just present within an activity that you're doing with them. And bad dreams can make it really difficult to share a bed with your partner if that is something that you are currently doing. Hyperarousal and chronic stress, right? So this feeling of just being on all the time because of this chronic stress that we're currently in. As we know, it activates that fight, flight, or freeze modality of our body, right? And because of that, we're kind of always on edge. And it can make it difficult for our partners or friends or colleagues because they feel like they're walking on eggshells around us. Because we're always just a little bit away from kind of tipping over the edge, nobody wants to push us there. So everyone's kind of walking on eggshells, and it makes it difficult to really connect on a deeper level. Similarly, because we're on edge, we can be really quick to erupt, right? It doesn't take much to push us into that hyper arousal, right? That volcano state that we've talked about where we just kind of explode, right? Healthcare and frontline workers may also have low tolerance for emotional displays from others, right? Because we're experiencing this hyperarousal and we're doing the best that we possibly can to manage all of the stress that we currently are, our tolerance for other emotions that aren't ours but others can decrease. We can't take on the added burden of other people's emotions as well at this point. We can be kind of constantly suspicious or on high alert, right? Kind of that vigilance piece, right? So if we're in this fight, flight, or freeze mode, we're always kind of looking around, waiting for what's next, waiting for what's going to happen. And finally, we can be overly sensitive to signs of attack or disrespect, right? Again, it doesn't take much to push us over the edge right now. So we can be overly sensitive to maybe a small comment that wasn't meant as an attack, but we perceive it as one right out the gate. Take a moment just to see if, as I'm going through any of them have stuck out to you, and just flag it in your mind as maybe this is something where an OSI is contributing to difficulties within your relationships, as opposed to this being something else. We also have avoidance, right? So we talked a bit about avoidance not that long ago. But we know that when we avoid, right, we really distance ourselves from our family and our social support networks. And in these cases, sometimes even our family might enable our avoiding symptoms by noticing that it's difficult for us to leave the house and just staying home with us. And while this can be seen as a sign of caring and compassion, unfortunately, it just actually perpetuates these avoidant symptoms, right? If we don't have any good motivation to go and engage in the thing that is, maybe making us a bit nervous or a bit anxious, we really won't do it. And we're going to continue that cycle of avoidance. There's an increased risk of self-harm. So in avoiding, right, if we're trying to avoid some of these big, hard emotions and thoughts, sometimes self-harm is a strategy that people will use to do so. So there's an increased risk of that as well. And lastly, sometimes healthcare and frontline workers will engage in addictive activities in order to numb out. We saw that in our last talk with Raylene, who was the healthcare worker who was overworked and would come home and have a few glasses of wine, right? Trying to use these other strategies to numb that emotion. But as we've talked about, it's not always effective. We also see alterations in thoughts and feelings, and these can have big implications within our relationships. So first and foremost, if we're having these big, difficult thoughts and feelings, it's really difficult to connect with emotion. And so because we're avoiding that emotion, we disconnect from emotion, and it decreases the intimacy within our relationships. We may blame ourselves for our OSIs or our operational stress injuries, and it makes it really difficult for us to connect with others because we're dealing with this sense of we brought this on ourselves, and it makes it really difficult to have a partner that understands that or a friend that understands that. And the partner in themselves may feel ineffective in trying to soothe and trying to help because they don't understand all of the symptoms and what's going on with this OSI. We may feel out of control, right, with some of these symptoms. These thoughts can be really challenging to manage, and some of these big emotions we've talked about are really hard to rein under control. And so because of that, we sometimes go the other way and we try to exert more control in other areas of our life, basically to compensate. So a classic example of this is the military dad, right? So the military dad might be exposed to all of these highly distressing experiences in his work where he's very out of control in some of these different situations. So at home, they follow very strict rules, right? Overly controlling, highly strict. Now, this is just kind of a cliche example of the military family, but this does exist in other realms too. So we can see things like increased rules, increased routines, those types of things. We can also have difficulty trusting, right? If we're constantly kind of on edge and we're worried about what's going to happen, it's difficult to have faith in those around us and be able to put our trust in the people that we care about. And lastly, we might lack compassion for ourselves and others. This really goes into that feeling of that burnout that we talked about in the very, very first session, right? It's challenging during these periods of prolonged chronic stress and hyperarousal to continue to feel like we're being effective at our jobs. And when we start to feel ineffective at our jobs and like there's no hope really for it to change, we start to lose compassion, right? We start to get into this kind of stuck place, and it is hard to connect with others. Another thing that we can see with OSIs within the context of a relationship is secondary traumatization. Now, we talked about this a little bit within the context of even your own job potentially, which is where, unlike primary traumatization, where you are the direct person who's involved in a traumatic accident or incident, right, where there's a threat of harm to your own well-being, in secondary traumatization, this is where we see somebody who's just repeatedly exposed to someone else's trauma, okay? Whether it's an ER doctor or nurse that is exposed to, the constant car crashes or other fatal accidents or severe accidents, or a news reporter who's commenting on all of these, or maybe you just have a client or a patient who has trauma of their own and continuously brings it up and you'll hear it again and again and again. Now, in this case, when we're talking about it in relation to our family members, especially if we've experienced direct primary trauma ourselves, we can bring secondary traumatization into our own homes and into our relationships. Okay? So if our family members are trying to look after us and trying to help us through this trauma, they can sometimes experience secondary traumatization just by having been around the trauma enough as well. And this can result in them experiencing things like burnout or compassion fatigue, even though they're not actually working within the healthcare field, but by being in a relationship with somebody who maybe is experiencing that trauma, we can see that secondary traumatization as well. Now, there is a possible impact on children here as well. When a frontline or a healthcare worker suffers from an OSI, it really becomes an entire family matter, right? We've talked about all these different symptoms that might show up, and unfortunately, they don't just stay at work. They tend to come home with us too. And so with this, children can actually be impacted by the changes in their parents' mood and functioning. I often like to refer as children as little sponges. They tend to just kind of soak up everything that's around them. And they're pretty intuitive. So if there's a change within the home, if there's a change within their parental functioning or their parents' mood or attitude, they notice right away and they can soak it up. So there can be implications for kids as well, which is why this tends to be such a big family concern if this is present within the home. So I want you just to reflect on this in your own life, in your own context, of how your possible OSI has maybe affected your relationships. Has it shown up in the areas of trust or control? Have you maybe distanced yourself? Is there less emotional closeness or physical closeness than you used to have? Are you seeing things like these distressing thoughts and feelings coming up and maybe getting in the way of you being able to connect with those around you? This isn't just a family thing. This can be friends and colleagues as well. Take a moment just to reflect on that. So now that we've talked about the different ways that an OSI might be impacting your current relationships, it's helpful to have something that we're wanting to strive for, something that we're wanting to move forward towards, so that we can make some appropriate steps. So let's talk about what a healthy relationship is and different things that we're going to want to look for within them. So first and foremost, there needs to be a shared likeness between the individuals in the sense that they like one another. It's really difficult to be in a relationship where either you dislike somebody or they dislike you. There needs to be a shared aspect of respect within the relationship. They need to respect one another. There needs to be a common understanding, right? There needs to be a mutual shared understanding of maybe each other's experiences or values. Needs to be a shared appreciation. You need to actually appreciate the person you're in a relationship with and vice versa. We're looking for things like acceptance, right? We're not forcing the other person in the relationship to change or to alter. We're accepting them just as they are, and they are accepting you just as you are. And trust. There needs to be this aspect of trust within the relationship. Otherwise, there's going to be increased conflict and we're going to see some problems down the road. And you'll notice as I went through all of these different aspects, I constantly said shared or mutual, and this is really because it needs to go both ways. You can't have one person have all of these aspects and the other have none and have a good relationship. This needs to be shared. These need to be traits that are seen on both sides of the relationship. So how do we manage our OSIs in the context of wanting to have this positive, healthy relationship? Well, it's really hard and almost impossible to control everything outside of ourselves, right? There's so many other people and different systems that are at play that are much bigger than ourselves. So we can't really focus on other people and external events. What we can do is we can learn how to control ourselves within the context of these environments and relationships. So we can learn to minimize conflict and improve quality time, both at home or with these other social relationships that we have. So in terms of conflict, let's talk about that for a minute here. Because conflict is inevitable in all relationships, whether it's with a spouse, with a kid, with a colleague or a friend, parent, right? We're going to see this everywhere. And the OSI symptoms, as we've talked about, increases our risk of conflict, right? There's so many different things going on and we're not really handling distress very well. And so we're more likely to end up in some of those conflict situations. So we need to ensure emotional and physical safety and rebuild trust within these relationships so we have a safe place where we can go through conflict in a safe and productive manner. So, first and foremost in ensuring safety is there's a few things that we want to look for. And we have this, what's called the HALT-O principle. And so this is before you engage in any type of conflict, I want you to do a quick self-check, okay? You're going to do a quick self-check, and whomever you're going to engage in a conflict with is also going to do the same thing. So this is a really helpful tool to bring into your relationship. If you have a spouse, maybe they want to share in this learning with you. But what we're going to look for is 5 different principles. So in this self-check, we're going to look at a couple things. 1, we're going to look if we're hungry. I'm sure everybody's heard the term of being hangry, right? If you're starving and you're hungry and your body's run down, it's really tough to have the patience and compassion and understanding to go into a conflict and have it be a positive experience. So first and foremost, are you hungry? Are you angry? The other part of that is something already going on in your day that you're upset about, right? We don't want to be displacing anger in our conflicts, right? So if you have an argument with a colleague or a coworker, we don't want to come home and bring that to our spouse, our friend, our roommate, right? If we're already angry, we need to resolve that emotion first before we're engaging in something else. The L in this, for the HALT O principle, is lonely. If we've been feeling socially isolated, again, our tolerance for stress and frustration really decreases. So maybe before we're engaging in a conflict, we need to pursue some of that social connectedness, right? And it doesn't have to be big. If we're struggling with some of this, maybe it's just that we sit down and we watch a TV show with a partner, right? Or a friend. We go for a walk with a neighbor. But we need to do something to resolve that first. T is tired. Are we tired? Again, we know how important sleep is for our mood and our functioning and our cognition and our thoughts. It can be really challenging to have a productive discussion with someone else when we're tired. This is where we'll start to see increased emotionality. We'll start to see things derail because we just don't have the tolerance to get through that type of difficult conversation. And the last part here that we've added on is this O, which is overwhelmed. If we're already at a state in our lives where we're feeling like the walls are kind of coming in on us and we're overwhelmed, there's too much going on, this again can be a time where we're going to displace some of this emotion into this other conflict that we're going into. So again, I use the example of going from work, right? Right now, especially in the pandemic, I'm sure many of you are feeling overwhelmed within the workplace. It's really difficult then to go home and engage in a conflict without bringing that feeling of being overwhelmed with you, right? So we need to go home, we need to do something to reduce that feeling of being overwhelmed before we're engaging in another conflict situation. And we're going to talk about what some of these things are in a moment. So making sure that when we're going through this, we're doing a self-scan, taking note of how we are currently with all of these basic needs. We need to meet them all first so that we're in a good place to go into a conflict. If you need, breathe, take a time out, go and exercise, go and do a self-care activity, go and do something that's going to help bring you back to your equilibrium before engaging in this conflict. Now, this can also be used mid-conflict. So if you're in a conversation with a spouse, a colleague, a partner, and you're starting to notice that you're getting really angry, right? This is not uncommon. Some feelings might get hurt during these conversations, and we're starting to get those big emotions. Maybe we're feeling overwhelmed. We can pause, okay? If those are starting to come up, we want to take a pause from the conversation. Again, leave, go and do some breathing like we've practiced. Maybe use that grounding technique, the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 technique. Bring everything back down, center, calm, and then we can re-engage. Now, there's a few rules that I want you to follow when you're going to engage in conflict. And this goes for your partner, this goes for a friend, a family member. And again, these rules are often helpful to make sure everybody is aware of them prior to going into the conflict. So first and foremost, we want to plan ahead. It's really challenging for everybody to have a productive conversation about an issue at hand when one party is surprised by the conversation. So we want to maybe plan a time, right? Especially if it's a significant conversation, okay? So if it's with a spouse, hey, I think we need to spend more time discussing X, Y, or Z. Let's chat about it when we come home from work tonight or after dinner, okay? If it's with a colleague or even a boss, right? Hey, I've been wanting to arrange a time to talk to you about this thing within the workplace. Can we set up a meeting Wednesday at 2, right? You're giving the opportunity to make sure that we have everyone on board, everyone is planned ahead, no one is surprised. And the same thing goes for you. So if you have somebody come to you with a conflict that has surprised you, you can say just that. You can say, I'm not prepared to have this conversation at exactly this time. Can we talk about it tomorrow after dinner instead? Give yourself that opportunity to become mentally and physically prepared for this type of a conflict so that you're best able to make sure that it's a productive conflict and we're able to get some resolution through it. Make sure that every member of this conflict has their eye on the prize. So if, maybe it's two parents that are arguing about a decision for their child, The prize in this situation is the well-being of the child, okay? And it's really important to make sure that everybody is maintaining that in their eye as we're going through the conversation. This isn't about winning. This isn't about being right. It's about making sure that we do the best thing for this child, okay? Same thing within the workplace, right? If we're having a disagreement with a colleague about a best practice within the workplace, right? This is maybe about making sure that the wellness of the patient is the prize, right? We're doing the best possible practices that we can to provide the best care for this patient. It's not a matter of who's right, who's more senior, anything like that. We have a prize in mind and we're working towards that. Through the conflict, I want you to make sure that you're using I statements, right? I'm sure you know the feeling when somebody comes at you and say, you never do this, you never do that, right? As soon as I say this, right, maybe it makes you feel a little bit defensive right out the gate. And this is often the case. As soon as we bring in a you statement, as soon as we're assigning blame or anything like that, we get that defensiveness, we get that high emotionality, and the productivity of the conversation decreases. Instead, reflect on I statements. So, I feel this way. I believe that this might be a better option, X, Y, Z. We can continue with those I statements. We're going to stick to one topic in these conversations as well, right? We're not going to bounce around. We're not going to bring up previous fights, right? People often start doing this when they feel like they might be losing. So again, even in this context, if you're losing, we're probably not keeping the eye on the prize in this conversation. But we don't want to bring up previous conversations, right? So if we're discussing, what's the best plan for this child moving forward, we don't want to bring up, last week I cleaned the kitchen 4 times and you only did it twice, okay? Unrelated, doesn't matter, doesn't have anything to do with this point or this conversation. We want to make sure we're sticking to one topic. We want to make sure that we're staying calm. So this goes back to that Halto principle that we just talked about. We're wanting to make sure that we're staying calm and centered. As soon as our emotionality starts to increase, it actually interferes with our ability to think logically. It gets in the way. Emotionality overrides some of our cognitive ability. And so if we start to feel like we're getting into that hyperarousal or even that hypoarousal state, right? We're going out of our window of tolerance. If we start to feel like we're going in either one of those directions, we need to pause. We need to take a minute. And it's as simple as saying, I can feel myself getting really heated in this moment. I want to be able to continue having this conversation with you. I'm not able to do so right now in the state that I'm in. I need to take a couple minutes. Can we come back in 20 minutes, right? Or maybe I need to eat something, right? I'm really not feeling very good right now. I need to go eat something. Can we continue this after dinner? Okay, and you can put a pause on this conversation until you're able and in a good place to continue having it. And lastly, no below the belt shots, right? In most relationships, we know that there's pieces that our counterpart are self-conscious of. We know what, kind of pushes their buttons. We do not want to be bringing up any of these in the conversation and vice versa. It's not fair to have those thrown at you. All these do is they increase the emotionality of the conversation and they decrease everyone's ability involved to continue to keep their eye on the prize, to stay calm, and to meet that positive resolution that we're looking for through this conflict. Another really key piece and a way to improve our relationships at home is improving the quality time that we actually spend while we're there. So they've done a bunch of research, and couples that maintain a positive connection and an intimacy actually spend 5 or more hours each week doing shared activities or rituals. So this can be things like partings. How do you say goodbye to your partner or your spouse, right? Do you have a ritual? Does somebody come to the door and send the other person off, right? Do you leave together? Do you maybe walk to work or drive to work together? What does that look like? Reunions. So I love to use the great example of, if you have a dog, right? Or if you can picture a dog or having a dog, right? When you get home from work, the dog is typically so excited to see you, right? It runs over, it's all excited to see you, and you call out its name and you pet it and you have this whole little moment, this reconnection piece with the dog when you come home. It's actually surprisingly common how many people have that ritual but don't actually have a ritual with their spouse, right? There's no shared common when whomever gets home, the other person gets up and comes to the door, chats and asks about how their day is or anything like that. especially when kids get involved in the mix. It can get really hectic, right? You're coming in, kids are running around, maybe you have this dog that's wanting this attention. But it's really important to carve out that time, even if it's just a brief hi, a quick hug, and we're able to move on. But we want to see that consistency, have that shared ritual. Shared rituals of affection, making sure you're taking time to be affectionate with your partner, carving out that quality time with them. Even if it's just sitting on the couch and watching TV, how are you being affectionate with your partner at that point in time? Cooking dinner together, looking for these opportunities in regular day-to-day life to strengthen that relationship. And lastly, we want to bring in this concept of admiration and appreciation within the relationship. This is one of a key piece that can really boost positive feelings within a relationship on both ends. And we're going to talk about an exercise that we can do to increase just that at the very end of today's presentation. Some more activities and rituals that you can engage in to increase that quality time at home include things like celebrations. How do you celebrate one another's successes, birthdays, anniversaries, those types of things? Making sure that there is some sort of plan or ritual in place that you both appreciate and enjoy. Other things include things like bedtime. How do you go to bed, right? Is this something that you share together? Does somebody go before the other one? Is there a bedtime ritual, a goodnight routine that you both have or you could have and share? Things like prioritizing date nights, actually making sure that, especially if you're a parent with kids, that you're getting the opportunity to get away and get that quality time of just the two of you to really have that deeper connection and maintain it. There's also this thing called the 5-to-1 rule. And what's really interesting here is, as humans, we are designed to pay more attention to the negative information in our environment than the positive. And again, this was developed because it served an evolutionary advantage, right? The positive information generally wasn't dangerous versus the negative information could be. So we developed to pay more attention to negative than positive. And because of that, in our relationships, even though we might say an equal number of positive and negative things in a given relationship, if we're only breaking even, the person we're saying it to is going to feel much more of that negativity than the positivity. So we have the 5-to-1 rule, which is for every one negative statement, even if it's an encouragement to change a habit or something like that, basically anything that could be perceived as a negative comment, any one negative comment needs 5 positive comments to basically counterbalance that within the relationship. And it's not that you have to say one negative comment and then list out 5 positive things about that person, but just making sure that we're aware of this ratio in our minds to make sure that we're not building an environment where the other person that we're in a relationship with might be perceiving things to be more negative than we're intending them to be. And last but not least, we're going to talk about children here. So we want to make sure the same way that we're carving out time, especially for parents to get their own quality time in that date night, we want to make sure that we're looking for that opportunity to have that one-on-one child with them each week. So making sure it's just, even if it's just carved out a little half an hour or an hour here, whether it's on the weekend or a weekday, helping with homework, doing something productive together on the weekend, even if it's just running to the grocery store and you get to have that child come with you and they're excited to be there, making sure that you do get that one-on-one time with the child every week. In terms of improving communication within the house, so we want to build on communication because communication and good communication is one of the best predictors of relationship satisfaction. And if we cannot express our thoughts and our feelings appropriately to our partners or the other individuals we're in a relationship with, it excludes them from these important experiences that we are having, and it creates a sense of disconnection. Right? We want to be able to facilitate that shared understanding of each other's life experiences. And again, this isn't just for a spousal relationship. This can be with a friend, a parent, a child. We want to be able to share our experiences and our thoughts so that we're able to connect with one another about them. And if we feel disconnected from others, emotional and physical intimacy decreases. Right? We're not as inclined to want to be as open or be around this individual as much. It just decreases that quality of the relationship. And if we cannot communicate our needs, they go unmet, right? It's really important to remember that the people that we're in relationships with are not mind readers, right? We need to be able to express our own needs in order for them to be met. It's unreasonable to expect somebody just to happen to know what you need at a given point in time. There needs to be a verbalization of these needs. And assertiveness skills training can help. Sometimes it can be intimidating to want to be able to express your needs, especially maybe if you're in a newer relationship. It can be a bit uncomfortable and tricky at times. So if you're feeling like you have trouble expressing your needs within relationships, I'd encourage you to look into something like assertiveness training. And again, pursuing maybe more assistance in this area. Other ways of improving communication are really getting to know your partner or the person that you're in a relationship with. And this is done by asking open-ended questions. You really want to explore this other person's world. You want to know what their important experiences are, what their values are, what their priorities are. And you do this by just letting them tell you, but you can ask them essentially prompting questions. So we're trying to avoid those closed-ended questions of, did you have a good day? Yes, right? If an answer can be given as a yes or no, then that's a closed-ended question. We want to make somebody have to just tell you, right? So instead of did you have a good day? We're looking for how was your day, right? And if they say good, right, we can ask for more, right? What made it good? What was exciting about today? What did you enjoy about today? Right? All of these questions require somebody to give you more detail about their day and their life. We want to share that fondness and admiration and create a culture of appreciation within our relationships. We both want to feel appreciated in our relationships, and we want to make sure that the person that we're in the relationship with feels appreciated as well. Again, we're going to talk about a way of doing that towards the end of today's presentation. And we want to notice the small moments where either your partner or the individual that you're in a relationship with makes a bid for connection and attention. And what this is a bid can be asking for, hey, do you want to get together on Thursday, right? It can be a pretty obvious open thing. It can also be, say you're at home and your spouse makes a comment of, oh man, it looks really nice outside. Right? We have two ways of responding towards this. Either we can turn towards this bid for attention, or we respond, right? Yeah, it does look nice outside, or oh, let me come see, right? Being part and going into that conversation, moving towards that individual. Or the other option is basically to turn away and either not connect or make a right? We're kind of shutting down that conversation, shutting down that bid for connection. So even though it might seem like just a statement, it might not seem like somebody's asking for attention in that point of time. By making these little statements, we're actually inviting somebody else to come into our shared experience. And so make sure that we're watching for those. It's really important to see when our partner or spouse or friend or parent or child is making those bids for connection, right? They're trying to invite you into their shared experience. Now, if we do have a complaint or a concern that we're wanting to bring up in a relationship, we have a couple rules around this as well. So the three main ones is we're going to state the feeling that comes along with the complaint. We're going to describe what, not who, has caused this feeling. And we're going to say what we need to resolve this complaint. So a common example we could pull on is, maybe the kitchen is dirty, after dinner, and whomever, let's say the wife in this situation, is upset because they feel like they're always cleaning up and they don't get any help, right? So things that we're trying to avoid is having this wife say to her spouse, John, you never help clean up the kitchen. I'm always doing it myself. I'm annoyed, okay? What this does is it brings up that emotionality, it brings up that defensiveness. Instead, we want to change that to stating the feeling, describing what has caused this feeling, and saying what we need moving forward. So in this case, instead, we can say, John, I'm feeling frustrated because the kitchen continues to be dirty every night and I have to clean it. Moving forward, I will feel a lot better if I can have help doing so. Okay? So in this situation, we're not assigning blame. We're giving a very clear, this makes me upset, right? We're putting forward that feeling. We're giving that reasoning towards why we have this complaint, right? if people don't understand why we have a complaint, it's difficult for them to get on board with wanting to help resolve it, right? If we give them the reasoning, this is hard for me, this is emotionally hard for me, right? We can exude that empathy from the person we're talking to, and we can help get them on board with the resolution that we need in this case. We're going to avoid these statements like always and never, right? Because those often bring up that emotionality piece, right? If you say things like, well, the kitchen is always dirty, right? It leaves room for the other person to say, well, it's not always dirty, right? We don't want to leave any room for any of those types of arguments. They just don't help us in this context. So we're just going to state what is going on here. The kitchen continues to be dirty. It makes me frustrated. I need help cleaning it, okay? And avoiding that blame. So again, we're taking John out of this situation. We're not blaming John for the kitchen being dirty. We're stating that it is dirty and stating that we need help in fixing it. Now, we do have this concept of love languages, and everybody has their own love language or languages that they tend to gravitate towards. And this is both how individuals show and want to be shown affection. So we're going to briefly go through the different ones here. We're going to talk about how each one presents, and you can take a look at maybe what seems to be sticking out for you, what you think your love language or love languages are, and maybe what your partner or your friend or your parents' love languages are, to see how maybe they are wanting to be shown affection. So we're going to start with words of affirmation. So people that have the love language of words of affirmation need that verbal communication of affection and appreciation, right? So if you're trying to communicate with somebody whose love language is words of affirmation, you're going to want to be very positive towards them. You're going to want to encourage them, affirm them, listen actively to what they're telling you, which means as they're talking to you about a concern or their day, you were maybe repeating pieces of it back to them so they know that you're listening. In terms of actions, sending unexpected texts or an email or a note, leaving them something to find in their lunchbox, right? Those little things that show them that you are verbally thinking and communicating with them. Things to avoid here are things like non-constructive criticism, right? These words that are coming out of your mouth are very, very important to them. It's not just about the criticism, it is about actually how they are perceiving being cared for. So making sure that we're not being overly blunt or harsh with these individuals, and making sure that we are appreciating their effort, right? If they do something and they go out of their way to do something nice, making sure that we're verbally recognizing and appreciating their efforts. The next love language is physical touch, and this is very similarly what it sounds like in terms of how to communicate, which is all nonverbals in this case. So that physical closeness, holding hands, sitting right next to them, making sure that there is a physical component to the affection that's being shown. So like I said, we can hold hands, we can make sure that intimacy is more of a priority in this situation, and things to avoid. So making sure that we're not physically neglecting this person, going for long stints without intimacy, and receiving affection coldly. So if your partner comes up to you and they want to hold your hand and you kind of begrudgingly do it, they're going to notice. Next love language is receiving gifts. And a lot of people view quite negatively of this love language, and I want to clarify that it is not a capitalistic love language in this regard. Receiving gifts has to do with the idea of this individual was thinking of me when they weren't with me, and it can be a very small thing. So it's about the thoughtfulness and the priorities made to improve the day of the individual that you're in the relationship with by showing them that you were thinking about them. So this is like little gift giving. So when you're at the grocery store, you happen to notice that their favorite snack is there, so you grab it for them, right? Maybe you're grabbing coffee and you know that they didn't say that they wanted anything, but you still grab them that cookie anyway. Little things like this. It doesn't have to be a big gift, a big monetary exchange, just little things that have them know that you were thinking about them while you were apart. Things to avoid when someone's love language is gift giving is forgetting a special occasion. This is going to be a big thing for them. So making sure that we're remembering these special occasions, and that any of the gifts we're giving enthusiastically. We're not doing it because we were told we had to do it. We're doing it because we genuinely want to bring this person joy. The next one here is quality time, and that really is making sure that we have that quality time set aside without interruption to spend with that individual. So ways that we can take action, things like those date nights, or making sure that that you're actually physically going and seeing your mom or your sister or your friend or your colleague, and making sure that while we're engaged in these activities, we're not distracted. Okay? So we're not constantly checking our phone, we're not interrupting things to take a phone call or to check on something else. Even things like TV can be distracting sometimes, so maybe turning off the electronics and really just having that one-on-one conversation, that quality time that way. And lastly, here we have acts of service. And this is using action to showcase your affection. So this is things like offering to help with maybe the housekeeping, right? Even though it's not maybe your job to do the vacuuming, you just wake up and you do the vacuuming one day because you want to let your partner maybe sleep in a little bit. Acts of service that help their lives run smoother shows them that you care. So things like doing chores, making breakfast for them are really great options. And things to avoid here are making additional requests that your partner or the person that you're in a relationship with does more, right? So I can't do my own things. I need you to additionally run this errand, or I need you to do more of this cleaning or cooking or anything like that. And not following through on offers to help. So making sure that if you do say, oh yeah, I'm gonna take the garbage out, make sure that you actually take the garbage out, right? That it's not just getting left for days and days and days, because this, again, while it may feel like it's just a task, right? It's just the garbage. It doesn't actually mean very much. To this person, it actually is a sign of how much you care about them. So summed up, there's this really great example using tacos of how these different love languages present. So words of affirmation is saying something like, your tacos are delicious. Acts of service is, I made you tacos. Receiving gifts is, here is a taco. Quality time is, let's go out for tacos together. And physical touch is, let me hold you like a taco. So just kind of a fun little way to reflect on maybe how you are wanting to receive emotion or to receive affection, how maybe the people that you're in a relationship with want to receive affection. And this is a really great communication point. Feel free to Google something like the 5 love languages, and you'll find various quizzes online that you and your partner can go through and do together and find out actually what your love language is, what their love language is, so that you're better able to both show and receive affection. The other piece that we've referred to through this presentation is that concept of love and admiration. And one of the really great ways that we can start to showcase love and admiration is by making sure that we're verbalizing it. So first and foremost, I'm going to get you to grab a piece of paper, grab a pen. I'll give you, feel free to pause this video if you want to grab that stuff. And when you have all of that, I want you to think about a person that you're in a relationship with, maybe that you're wanting to improve that relationship. So it could be a spouse, could be your parent, right? Could be a sibling, a colleague, okay? And I want you just to write down one characteristic that you find endearing, enjoyable, or lovable with that person. Okay? You can think about it for a moment. Just something that you genuinely enjoy about them. Next, I'm going to get you to write down a characteristic of that person that makes you proud of them. What makes you brag about this person to your friends? What makes you excited to tell other people about them in your life? I'll give you a moment just to think about that and write it down when you're ready. Next, I'm going to get you to identify a belief that you both share. So this can be, that the most important thing in life is family, right? Maybe you both believe that physical fitness is a top priority, right? Maybe you both believe that patient care needs to come first. Whatever that belief is that you both share, just think about it for a moment and write it down. And lastly, I'm going to get you to think about a difficult time that you successfully weathered together. And I want this to not be a point of conflict in your relationship. I want this to be a time that things were just difficult in life, right? Maybe it was a difficult transition within the workplace. Maybe you both got a new boss together. Or maybe one of your kids got sick and you and your partner had to look after that. Maybe there was some financial trouble. Okay? There's a whole bunch of different things that can come up, and I just want you to think of a difficult time that you both weathered successfully together. And now that you have all of that, I want you just to reflect on how you're feeling towards this person right now. Noticing any changes, any warmth that might be coming from you. And as I'm sure you can imagine, as you're, writing this down, it's often nice to maybe think about what other people might say about us, right? Think about maybe some of these positive things. And so I'd encourage you, as a way to share this love and admiration, to share some of these findings that you just wrote down and thought about with this individual that you were thinking of. Encourage you to share with them that you're proud of them, that they are so strong or ambitious or smart, right? Whatever it was that made you proud of them. Reflect with them on the time that you progressed through a difficult situation together. You can talk about how proud you are in your relationship, that you've come such a long way. Make this more of a point of conversation. So this terminology, this being proud and admiring of somebody, have that be more of a regular conversation that you're having with the people that you're in a relationship with. And I sincerely hope that people do it back to you. The more that we're able to cultivate that feeling of admiration and appreciation within our relationships, it opens the door to receive more of it back. So I encourage you, after all of this today, to reflect on your relationships in your life. Notice where some of these OSI symptoms might be coming up, where they might be interfering, and review some of the strategies we went over to maybe start thinking of ways that we can make some positive change in your relationship starting right away. Thanks so much, and we'll chat soon.